Welcome to today's video and today's podcast. If you're new to the channel, I talk on this channel about management and leadership, trying to help people that are either existing managers or people wanting to become managers to learn the skills they need to succeed. If you haven't already done so, do me a favor, follow me on your favorite podcast or subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you enjoy the content, hit the like button during the video. It'll help YouTube know they should show it to other people. I appreciate that. With me today, I have Mark Herschberg, and Mark draws on nearly 20 years of teaching at MIT's Career Success Accelerator program and a career spanning half a dozen industries. Mark distills the key skills for a 21st century career into the Career Toolkit, essential skills for success that no one taught you. Mark, you want to give us a little bit more about your background?
Sure. I came out of MIT back in the 90s with a couple technical degrees, and I started my career as a software engineer, but quickly moved up into management. And what I realized early on is that if I wanted to be a successful manager, it wasn't just about being a good software engineer. I had to learn all these other skills. And so I set out to develop them in myself. And along the way, I realized not only didn't I learn them in university, no one else did either, because they're never taught. And that led to my helping MIT start this course. And then they asked me to help teach there for the past 20 years. I put out the book. Throughout my career, I've done not only startups, but big companies and worked in academia as well. So I've done a lot of different activities.
Okay, you're the guest my audience needs today. So in the book, you claim someone can make $30,000 with your advice. That's a pretty bold claim. How can they do that?
Sure. Let's think about negotiating for a moment. Suppose you're 30 years old and you're going in for a job interview. They offer you the job and they offer you $70,000. But instead of taking the job, you've read a book on negotiation, mine or a different one. You say, okay, I'm going to negotiate this. So you go back and you negotiate for $71,000. We can all imagine doing that. That's not a huge lift. And so the manager says, okay, 71. Now, if you do nothing else in life, if you sit in this job for 30 years, you just made $1,000 more for the next 30 years. You made $30,000 for one single 5-minute negotiation. But of course, you're saying, well, no one's going to sit in a job for 30 years, right? You're going to have other jobs, promotions, raises. It's going to be a lot more than $30,000. And it's not just about trying to be the best negotiator in the world. Just being a little bit better gives you tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in income. But here's the thing. We know this works for negotiation. You can say, okay, right, negotiate, got more money. When you learn to be a better leader, a better communicator, have a better network, all of these translate the same way. It's just not as obvious because no one says, you're a good leader, here's $1,000 more. But it will have the same ROI when you invest in leadership skills by listening to podcasts like this one.
Okay, well, very good. So what do you think is the relationship between leading and following?
They are really two sides of the same coin. And so many people think, okay, well, I'm just going to sit back and wait to be a leader, and that will happen when I get a certain job. But in fact, you can develop your leadership skills even as a follower, because the skills that we want in a leader are the same skills that we want in a follower.
And that's very interesting because in the service management course I teach, I talk to the managers that are studying, and I tell them that what they want to do is to build their people into leaders, and they want to teach their people how to think about whatever their area of responsibility is, like it was their own business, which again would be one of those factors that builds leadership.
One thing about leadership, the great thing, it's not zero sum, it's not fixed. So if you are a leader, following your great advice of training the people under you to think and act and to be leaders themselves, that doesn't make you less of a leader. It means now you have a team that's far more capable. And as your team does more, you as a leader of that team is seen as running this. It's additive. It helps everyone. So yes, train up those leaders underneath you.
I agree with that. And just one other thing about it, a lot of people don't train their replacement because they're afraid. But it's interesting that if you don't train your replacements, you're not ever going to get promoted because they don't have anybody that can step in and fill your job. It's by training others that helps boost you up as well. In the book, you write that people can practice leadership every day. How?
This goes back to these follower skills. So even if you yourself are not being a leader at this moment on this project, as you work on your follower skills, and I break down the book, let's look at these individual skills for leaders, for followers. As you work on that, it makes you a more effective leader. So you don't have to be in the big chair today to improve your leadership. You can do it from wherever you are.
And I agree 100% with that. So what's the difference then in your mind between leadership and management?
This is a subtle one, and it is debated far and wide. Now, before I give an answer, the ultimate thing to remember is good leaders manage and good managers lead. And in the practical real world we live in, do both. And don't sit there and think about, oh, am I leading or managing at this moment? You will do both. But in the interest of studying it, I do break it down. And I would say the statement that most defined it for me, and I forget who said this quote, no one ever managed men into battle. Right? If you think about it that way, say, wow, okay, yeah, it's subtle, it doesn't define it, but when you think about the circumstances, yeah, you don't manage men into battle. And really, when we think about leadership, leadership is about the big picture, the vision, the overall direction. Management is a lot more on the execution and the delivery of that goal. There's lots of quotes about leadership determining where to put the ladder. Management is getting up the ladder, or similar things like that. But it tends to be leadership is more that first fundamental question, big picture, and then management's a lot more in execution. But again, in our day-to-day life and the job you do, hopefully you're both a leader and a manager, because you'll probably need both sets of skills.
And it's interesting you talk about skill, because one of the first pieces of the course I teach is about supervision. And I look at supervision like a diamond, like it's got all of these facets, management being one of them, leadership, mentorship. There's a lot of things that make up someone that's a good supervisor. But I would distinguish management and leadership because I have known people that were managers that weren't leaders. I have known leaders that weren't managers, because people naturally can become a leader where people will follow them. And then there's those managers that you hate working for because they aren't leaders.
You're right about that. And when we think about extreme cases, if we think about the CEO of a 100,000 person company, that person tends to be more of a leader. They're not dealing with a lot of details. They've got their executive team, other people to really do the management execution, but they better set that vision and strategy. A first level line manager, a project manager, someone says, okay, you're in charge of the squad of 5 people. Here's what we're going to tell you what to do. And you just have to make sure on time, on budget delivery. That's a lot more management. They're not saying, ooh, what should we do today? The answer is do what we're told. So you do at the extremes, get a little more of one or the other. But for many people here, when we think about our careers, probably you're not thinking of, I just want to be one or the other. So really do think about developing both sets of skills in parallel and day-to-day living both sets of skills.
And I agree 100% because the best managers are good leaders. And that is what makes coming to work so enjoyable. If you go to work for somebody that's a good leader, it makes your day so much better.
Imagine if someone said, okay, everyone, we're going to expand our business to Europe this year. We're going to increase revenues. Here's what we're going to do. Everyone says, wow, great idea. How? He goes, well, I don't know. That's for someone else to figure out. But hey, wasn't that a great idea? You're just going to take all the air out of the room. Now, if management is not the strength of that leader, he might say, okay, I've got people around me to help me figure out how, but still you want to have at least some of those skills or make sure someone's supplementing it if it's missing in you.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so what are the stages of team formation? Because I think this is a key piece of having a successful career and a successful department, getting a team that works together. So what are some of the steps?
This is something that we all think, okay, we want effective teams. They're great. You know it when you see it, but how do you make that happen? And a man named Bachman actually did research back in, I believe it was the 70s, and he studied team formation, found out there is a process, there's a standard natural progression that teams go through. And the stages are forming, storming, norming, and performing. And so what does this mean? So forming, okay, you come together, right? You're first thrown on a project with other people. Like, okay, who are you? Hi, I'm Mark. And oh, you're the finance person. God, yeah, I'm the technology person. We're just kind of learning about each other, learning about the goals. I mean, this might take hours, minutes, days, or weeks, depending on the size of the project. Then you get into storming. And this is where we're all new, but we don't really know how to work together. We might have different styles. We might rub someone the wrong way. So it's a little kind of chaotic. Then you get to norming. Okay, yeah, we know each other, and oh, I know when you say this, yeah, okay, like that's just how you talk, and I'm not going to take it personally. And oh, we like to communicate things by email as opposed to in-person meetings. Okay, good to know that. So you get these norms, you get how are we going to operate, and then once we've got that in place, now we're performing. Now we come together, and now we really know how to execute well. And so as a manager, your job is to look at the team and recognize they're going to go through these stages. What can you do to help get them through the stages? And at times they might revert back, right? If you've got a great performing team, but a couple people leave, some new people come in, what happens? Oh, you're back to that storming phase. You're back to new people. How can you help them move back into that performing stage?
Okay. And you talk about 3 precepts of management. What are these 3 precepts?
Management has really changed. When we think about management, the concept comes originally from the military, and then it morphed into, during the Industrial Revolution, managers. And the managers of the assembly lines who would say, I'm the manager, turn that screw, hit that hammer, I'm telling you what to do. And the manager will walk around, tell each person their task. These days, management is so different because as a manager, you probably don't know all the different aspects. You've got these cross-functional teams. You have people who are better experts than you. I'm a CTO, but my days of writing code are over. And some of the new technologies, I've never written that code. They know a lot more about the subtleties. Oh, no, you can't really do it this way. Oh, glad you know, I don't. So I can't just say, hey, you do this and you do that. I need to actually get input from the team, right? My job is more almost coordination rather than directing. And so what I need to do as a manager, there are 3 core things. I need to set the goals. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we're trying to achieve. I then need to help foster collaboration, make sure that team is working together effectively and that we're finding the answers, and then support them however I can. So that might be getting them resources, protecting them from outside distractions, but kind of being the defender and champion of the team. And if you're doing those 3 things, you're going to be an effective manager.
Okay, very good. And you mentioned that having the right answers isn't always necessary. Why don't you have to have the right answers?
Well, here again, we're used to that 19th century, early 20th century mentality of, well, I'm the manager. If you know and I don't, that's a problem, right? I always need to know more than you. But again, that's not true these days, where you have these teams where you've got deep knowledge in areas. My job as the manager is not to have all the answers. I'm not the professor standing up front saying, ask me anything and I will bestow my knowledge. My job is to make sure we as a team get the right answers. And that may come from, okay, you happen to know the answer. Maybe I know the answer. Maybe we figure out, here's how we get the answer. Maybe it's getting it from someone else. Maybe it's asking the right questions and then thinking about it together, coming up with the answer. But it's not simply, I need to know all the right answers.
I saw a quote somewhere and I forget where it was, but it said basically that you should hire people smarter than you are and then get out of their way. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
That's a great way to think about it, because again, if I have to do every little thing, if I have to know every answer, we're limited by what's here, right? We're limited by my head. And, there are limitations there, especially as you get in bigger teams. You want people who are deeper experts who can bring in different knowledge. Because if I bring in everyone who's just like me, but not as good, well, we're never going to do better than me. But if I bring in all these great experts, you put us together, wow, right? I mean, think about like any sports team, right? The pitcher's not the best hitter. The hitter's not your best outfielder, but you put all their skills together and you get a great team.
Exactly. Okay. So what do you mean by myth of the alpha male?
We have this historical view of what a leader should be. So think of kind of the classic mid-century movie, right? 1950s, 1960s, and the leading man. And what are those characteristics, right? He's strong and commanding. He's domineering. He doesn't make mistakes. Don't question him, right? And it's very kind of black and white character. And this is how we grew up, right? No matter what your age, you were exposed to some concept of this on TV and Hollywood and books. There weren't people who may have had doubt, who may have shown emotion. And unfortunately, many people still have this view of, oh, a good leader doesn't doubt himself. A good leader doesn't tolerate questioning if you disagree. A good leader makes a decision quickly and sticks to it, right? But we know today, in today's complex world, this isn't true. We know you can be a good leader and say, you know what, that's a good question. I got to think about it. Or you make a plan and say 2 weeks later, you know what, we've gone down this path. I realized I was wrong. And hey, we got to go in this other direction, right? But there's this kind of ethos of, no, a good leader is strong and decisive. And unfortunately, a lot of people without good leadership training, people who haven't heard podcasts like this or read books like mine, they go to that stereotype. And so they mistake these acts of confidence for leadership. And that leader is going to drive them right off the cliff because they are unwavering in who they are and won't admit mistakes or failures or take questions. So we need to break down this stereotype of this alpha male and recognize there are qualities of a leader that might not align to that. Sure, sometimes a leader is decisive, sometimes a leader is commanding, but there are other times when he or she might not be.
Okay. And how can you recognize a good leader from the myth?
Well, this is understanding leadership, right? Which you get from podcasts like this or reading books like mine. And you're saying, right, it's not decisiveness doesn't make someone a good leader. A good leader is someone who listens. A good leader is someone who communicates effectively. All these other skills, when you break it down, you realize just how they convey themselves is far less important than what they are doing. And that's really what you want to look for in a leader. And those are leaders you want to recognize and follow.
One of the things that I talk about with my students as well is that they need to look at their team. I mentioned earlier, train their replacement. But I said your replacement might not always be the guy that's been there the longest, because in a technical field, that's usually the way it works. Take your best technician, make him the manager. But he could be an absolutely horrible manager and not really be a leader. I try to get him to think, who shows me that they might be capable of leading? And it doesn't really matter how great a technician they are.
You raise a very good point that each job is different from the one before. And the biggest step is from an individual contributor to a manager. Because as you're an individual contributor, whether you're doing field repairs or writing code or running marketing campaigns, you're saying, okay, I know how to mechanically do something. I'm using that term broadly.
Yeah.
And as you get better at, okay, you become the senior person in that role. And you know all about how to craft this particular activity. Once you take that step to manager, you better understand how those things work so you can supervise them. But now all of a sudden you're responsible for hiring and mentoring and coaching and leading and project planning and a whole bunch of things that you probably didn't do in that individual role. And to your point, so many companies, you lose a great individual contributor, you gain a mediocre manager, so you're taking this double hit. And what you want to recognize is this person, not that they were great in their current role, are they right for the next role? And if they want that role, but they're not right, invest in training up this person and making sure he or she will have the right skills to be successful in that next step.
That is so true. And I believe that it's every manager's responsibility to train their replacement, because something could happen to a manager. They could walk out and get run over by a car. And a manager that's done his job, his department will keep right on going because there's somebody that can step in and pick up the load and make it work. The worst case in this situation is you've got a manager that knows stuff and doesn't share and doesn't train, and then something happens. And now all of a sudden you have a group of people with no leader and nobody that knows how to learn to step into that role.
Absolutely. There's a term in software engineering called bus factor, right? It started with, okay, I have a server. Well, if the server crashes, I need two, right? So I need redundancy, and you might need 3 or 4 or more. But then it's called bus factor because what happens if that lead person, the one who knows it all, unfortunately gets hit by a bus? You're in trouble. And you need that redundancy, not just in your servers, not just in your hardware, but in your people, right? If nothing else, someone's going to go on vacation, and you better be prepared for that contingency.
And that's funny because that's one of the things I talk about. I ask them the question, how many of you, when you go on vacation, have to take your phone with you and you spend your whole vacation on the phone? And I get a lot of people nodding their head. Yeah. I said, if you trade somebody that could replace you, then you could go on vacation and enjoy it. That's just a small example. So tell me a little bit more about your book. The book is the Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You.
Yeah, it covers 10 different areas. And this comes from feedback that corporate America has given MIT and it's given other universities about these are the skills we want and we're just not finding. Now, this is not just for MIT students. It's not even just for college students. This is for everyone. So the book's in 3 sections. First section, career plan. So how you can create and execute on a career plan. Second is working effectively, managing your manager, fitting into corporate culture. Third is how to interview. You know, we always learn here's how to be a candidate, but many of us are also part of hiring teams. And how do we actually hire other people? We've never been trained. Even senior executives I talk to say, yeah, no one ever taught me to do that. I just kind of do what I've been doing. But if you can be more effective at, like that negotiating, you're going to hire better people. Second section, leadership and management. Third section, there's 4 chapters, communication, negotiation, networking, and ethics. And again, these are the skills corporate America wants. But unfortunately, if you think about it, you've probably never been taught any of this.
I would agree. It's interesting that we put people in roles that they have no training for. Interviewing and hiring is such an important piece of it. One of our exercises in class is to go through and figure out what it costs to hire somebody. This came about because of something that happened in my career. But we go through and figure out what does it cost, especially with technicians. You got a lot of training and things that go into making one. So to get a guy where he's 100%, how much money do you have invested in him? And it's amazing because nobody ever realizes how much. The reason I went through that exercise the first time is I had an owner that let a person go rather than give them a 10-cent an hour raise. So they saved $208 a year and they let $60,000 in training go out the door.
Penny wise, pound foolish.
I figured out the numbers and I went, I just want you to understand what that decision cost, because it is not common that people think through the process. They just decide, oh, somebody's got to go.
And hiring the right people can really add to your bottom line, can make the team more effective, can improve retention. The wrong people, you have the cost of replacement, of the lost training, of the lowered operations while you're missing someone. If you hire the wrong person, it can poison your team where it's, I don't like working here because this new guy's a jerk. Hiring's so important. You know, if you think about it, I use the analogy of cooking. Now, I know how to cook. I've had to do it a lot this past pandemic. Okay, I'm sufficient. I haven't poisoned myself yet, but I am not a great chef, right? I learned a little from my parents, from the internet, and it's good enough for me, but you don't want me in charge of a restaurant. If you wanted me to run a restaurant, you'd say, okay, Mark, we're going to send you a cooking school. We're going to make you actually good and not just competent. And that's how we are at interviewing. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I've been in interviews. I get the idea. I'll ask the questions people ask me. You're not horrible, but you're just competent and you're not good. So investing in a little training, even just 2-3 hours of training people how to interview, makes them so much more effective in your hiring process.
That is such a great point. And I think I will talk a little more about that in class than I do, but I spend a significant amount of time in that discussion because it's probably one of the most critical decisions a manager makes is who he hires, because it has such far-reaching impact.
Absolutely. And we put 0 effort into teach them how to do it well.
Yes. Well, you know what, Mark? I have really enjoyed our conversation today. And I will put a link to your website and to your book in the show notes on the podcast and in the description on my YouTube videos, so that people that want to reach out, want to get your book, they can find the book and they'll know how to reach out and talk to you.
Fantastic. Yeah, you can, on the website, thecareertoolkitbook.com, you can learn about the book, download the free app, or a whole bunch of other resources to help you on your journey.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it very much. And thanks to the audience for being here. I hope you've enjoyed the interview. I know I did. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.